Hello, and welcome to the Engineering Influence podcast from ACEC. My name is Thomas Grogan, Senior Director, Economics and Market Intelligence at ACEC, and I'm also the Staff Director for the Technology Committee here. We're really happy to have Shankar Kalyana, Chief Technology Officer of Stantec, on our podcast today. Welcome, Shankar.
Hello, Thomas. Nice to meet you, and thank you for hosting me.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining. We're really excited to have you on here today. And one thing I wanted to just dive into, because I know this is a topic you've been talking about a lot recently, is what does digital transformation mean to you?
Oh my goodness, what a great way to start that conversation. So I think this is something that I've been talking about for a while. I've been playing in the space, even prior coming to Stantec, and one of the things that I've actually found is the interchangeable usage of terms like digitization and digital transformation. And they are both essential, but they have slightly different connotations. So I think digitization is really about, it's a necessary thing in the road to transformation where you're actually using digital technologies of various kinds to help in automating processes and driving efficiencies, pulling innovation through, et cetera, and various kinds. Digital transformation is kind of an expansive view of it that is less about just digital and more about how digital materializes, and it's more about the ways of working of the organization. So it gets to different facets of this around capturing new value. How do you actually use digital as a mechanism to drive new value to the enterprise and drive different aspects of strategy and create even new markets sometimes, right? Where digital is the only way to go, right? I mean, it's the primary way to even capture a new market. It is also about reimagining, the processes, because this is where the digitization to digital becomes a little bit different, because you can automate an existing process without making too many changes, and you just made the problem worse sometimes because you just highlight the inefficiencies very, very clearly. Whereas when you reimagine it, it's a whole different model as to you question why the process even exists. And you question, now you start at the outcome and the experience you want to deliver as opposed to just automating. So it's a different way to think about it. But underscoring all of that is part of what I mentioned about ways of working, because I think it comes down to a really new operating model that's a very, very modern, agile way of working with a whole different dimension of competencies and skills and technologies and architecture and other things comes to play. These are very foundational. Without that, it becomes really difficult to achieve the first two we talked about. So that's kind of what digital transformation really entails. I mean, and in the AEC industry, I've found we use the digitization term, quite frequently,
Right.
and we should be really shifting to this notion of digital transformation more and more, right? So,
Yeah, no, that's a good point in the dynamic that you mentioned, the difference between reimagining, kind of thinking outside the box, coming up with something new, versus just automating or digitizing an existing process, which may already be inefficient. So along those lines, you've been working in technology for a very long time. What are some best practices or lessons learned you've seen in other sectors around digital transformation that you would want to try to bring into the AEC industry, or conversely try to avoid because you saw something and it might have seemed like a good idea at the time and didn't work out?
no, that's a great point. So I think let me maybe take it in two dimensions, right? One is about, if you take the non AEC dimension of the other industries, clearly I think there is if we look at commonality across multiple industries, whether it's financial services, healthcare, retail, and AEC, we are going to find, as a general rule of thumb, that 60 to 70%, of the processes are actually quite common, regardless of industry. And so there's a lot to learn from, how business strategy is developed, how IT operations actually runs, how HR functions and talent management actually work. I mean, these are pretty common regardless of which industries we actually go to. Of course, the domain intersection comes into play in every one of them, and we absolutely have to worry about them. But if we always only focus on the AEC specific things, like design automation is a very AEC specific initiative. But yeah, of course, we can talk about how that is done, but we should also be thinking about what is actually occurring in other places we can actually leverage. And understanding the commonalities across different industries is a crucial thing to that, right? So I think that's one facet of it. In terms of now the lessons learned, regardless of what you are taking from another industry or we are actually doing it on our own within AEC, I would probably look at them as more as success factors as opposed to lessons learned, because in a sense it comes down to not in any particular order, but like the digital transformation, the key word is transformation as much as it's digital, right? Which means it is extraordinarily important, for active sponsorship and drive from the C-suite, right? Without a top-down sponsorship, transformation initiatives fail in general, because it doesn't have the legs to stand, right? And after a while. And the related aspect of transformation here, beyond just active, and by the way, the key word there is also active sponsorship, not just saying, hey, you know what, I support it and walk away.
Right.
It's actually being, part and parcel of the mission, being very active in defining the vision, the outcomes, the KPIs, and what we really want as a business, not to worry about mechanics, but really to define, kind of the objectives and the vision very, very actively. The other aspect is change management, right? I mean, because it really comes down to, because it impacts everybody in an organization, not just the intra view of it, but also the extra view of it. Our customers get impacted, the partners get impacted, right? The obviously the employees get impacted. So it's an ecosystem transformation, not just an intra-enterprise transformation, right? So understanding the personas, understanding these things and what it really means to them and how they're going to benefit from it, as opposed to being impacted by that, is very crucial to communicate. And it's an incessant communication, right? So you got to be on top of it continually. And the third thing I would call out is the ability to pivot, right? I mean, because these are long journeys that organizations usually take. So we have to be very iterative, very incremental, not worry about big bang, but be very, very cautious about how quickly we generate value. And we got to be able to pivot based on how new situations emerge, right, as it goes around, without impacting the vision.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, I mean, those are the three that I would call out, and there are probably many more, but these are on top of my head right now. Yeah, so.
Yeah, well, I keep talking about getting the whole C-suite buy-in and working in this whole ecosystem. What does your day-to-day as the chief technology officer look like? Who are you collaborating with, from internal stakeholders to maybe the client side, and kind of walk us through, what it looks like as the CTO of Stantec?
Oh, that's fascinating, because it's I mean, I can give you both the general sense of what the day in the life of a CTO is, as well as maybe a interesting anecdote from Stantec. But I really think it's like every other role. I think it was really important to have clarity of purpose and vision and scope of the role, right? Because everyone starts parsing the roles as chief and technology and officer, and starts having their own interpretations of what that actually is, right? So it's really critical to be able to communicate what that role's mission and scope and other things entail. And in some of these aspects, it also is explaining what technology even means. Some of these are overloaded terms. Are we really talking about physical infrastructure and the technologies associated with that? Are we talking about operational technology in the traditional way of SCADA and 2D CAD and other things, or are we talking only about cloud and DevOps and AI, right? So even the scope of what digital actually means and what technologies even entail in there, communicating defining the what of digital became pretty important. The other thing is the why of digital. I mean, again, going back to transformation, why I have to transform. Explaining the market tenets, explaining through use cases, really connecting the dots to say, what outcomes are we really trying to achieve, and why are we pursuing a strategy that's actually, in Stantec's case, it's a consulting business. So, we are a services company in the most of the AEC industries, a lot of that. So what does it really mean in the services context, and explaining that, becomes pretty paramount. But at the end of the day, it's really, once we define that, it's now, brass tacks, right? It's really connecting the strategy to execution, because without that, it's nothing else matters. So, pulling these pieces together and going through transformation purpose. But the other part of it, I'm going to say, is also, while we talk about mission and vision and communications and whatnot, it is the transformation we have to go within, in talent transformation and skills and so on. So even within our own organization, and in fact, in every one of these cases, the CTO's job is definitely going to entail a lot of the mentoring and coaching and upskilling and development, and of the teams, and then getting them to a different level of capability. So there's a lot of even defining career paths in some cases, and what digital actually means in the AEC industry that is traditionally used to worrying about a structural engineer's career, right?
Right.
All these things come into play. Yeah. So.
Yeah, no, that's a lot to juggle day to day. So, talking about having a clear definition about the role, but then the strategy, executing on the strategy, what do you think, or how do you think about a technology strategy and how that aligns, I guess, with an overarching business strategy? And what are kind of the different components of a technology strategy that someone who maybe is at a smaller firm or just getting started on digital transformation should consider or think about as they put together a technology strategy?
Oh, great question. So let's start with the smaller firm, dimension of it, because maybe that's easier, pun intended. But I think whether you're a one-person operation, whether you're a 10-person operation or a 100,000-person operation, I think the level of detail and level of complexity may vary. But I think it's extremely important that without a strategy, what that means is, what is the why are we in this, and what are we in this for? What outcomes are we really trying to achieve? It's like a small business and trying to create a business plan, right? You don't start a small business without having a business plan associated with it. It's very equivalent to that, right? So a strategy is extraordinarily important, but strategy without execution, is useless too. So connecting those two elements together to say, the vision for it, with the growth plan behind it, the investment model behind it, all those things are essential, whether you are a 5-person operation or a 50,000-person operation, right? I think it's extremely critical. So I look at that as the complexity may vary, but I think the essence of it is always important. Yeah.
Yeah, and another word you brought up, when you're talking about your day-to-day role, is pivot. I think that's a big word. It's used a lot, especially in the startup space. How would you, advise or provide guidance to a firm who maybe is working on a technology strategy, digital transformation, and might be going down the wrong path, right? How do you know if what you're doing is working out, or maybe you need to stop, pause, maybe you need to completely scrape what you're doing, or maybe it is a matter of pivoting. You got maybe 50% of it right, but there's other things that, are not really achieving the right metrics. How would you kind of, know when it's time to pivot as you're doing one of these initiatives?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I think pivot is something that it's consulting metaphor now, right? It's like the vocabulary of 1,000 words consultants actually use, and pivot is one of them. Yeah. But I think there's intent behind that, which is, it is recognizing that things will not stay the same. That what today may not necessarily, in fact, it's quite likely not necessarily the same 6 months from now or 1 year from now. So being very purposeful about that says that change is a constant, so embrace the change ahead of time, right? Type thing. And what that means is, now you have a methodology behind it, right? That you have a hypothesis. You are going to go to market. Let's take a product, or a solution that you are creating. you think this is what the user actually wants or a market actually wants, and this, in fact, you even envision that, working with a few users to say exactly what that actually means and how they're going to experience it. And in fact, they may even participate in that exercise, and you think you got all the bases covered because you have the user input, you know exactly what they want, so here off you go creating it. Except that the devil is in the details, and you figure out that, well, I mean, what we collectively came about as a strategy of approach is not what actually is needed, and I got to be able to make some bets against them and say, well, this bit worked and that bit failed, right? So it's that ability to be able to take that market input, take that user input, take that experience input, because consumption is very important. Because if you can create all you want, but if the people are not consuming it the way it is, then you got to question why they're not consuming.
Right.
So those learnings coming now feeding back into your overall approach. Now that's where the pivoting starts occurring. Like what worked, what didn't work, and your ability to your strategy did change. You're still about creating an outcome, but now the mechanics of how you create that outcome, that obviously you'll have some jagged edge paths as you go through that, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of why we use the word pivot. It is being very purposeful about it. But with that said, sometimes you get a left field thing, like when COVID hit. I mean, we didn't anticipate it, so we had to really all figure out how to go virtual, right? So that we do have some black swan events like that we had to go worry about. But for the most part, I think you have to build it into the model and not just assume that how you start off is exactly how you're going to end up with, right? So
yeah, and I think talking about, say, customers and clients, getting feedback from them, but also understanding what might work for one client isn't necessarily scalable. And, to put all your eggs in one basket because you developed a solution for one client who really likes it or wants it, is it going to scale? How do you see, as you brought up earlier, AEC being primarily a professional services industry, is kind of figuring out what sort of initiatives, customer solutions might have legs for being productized or scaling larger versus the more traditional consultant model, basically billing for your time and services.
Yeah, that's a great thing. I think one is about the general consulting industry, right? I mean, any services industry, if it clearly human, intellectual prowess, capability, expertise, and the intellectual capital associated with that is really the differentiator, right? There's no question that, humans are at the center of the equation, right? I mean, it's not AI running the world; it is actually humans, who are actually providing the counsel and the work to be able to, drive value for the consuming clients, right? So there's no question. But with that said, it's about now figuring out how you can be more effective and efficient in achieving those outcomes, right? So, what are repeatable patterns that you can figure out and say, how do you actually harvest things that they really keep doing over and over again in 6 different clients, and how do you patternize them and then codify them, right? And then when you codify them, is it codified work because it's that 6 is only going to be another 10 more clients, or the 6 going to be another 600 more clients, right? I mean, that question, only market testing will tell you, right? So the level of codification, level of hardening that you have to go through in that exercise is obviously going to change based on the scale of market that you're addressing. And the other aspect is obviously, at the end of the day, it's about, value to the client from the standpoint of speed and efficiency, because, most clients really don't care about, how you do it. I mean, they do care to some extent. As engineers, we all do. But at the end of the day, we're all worried about outcomes, right? So it's about the hiding some of those details to say, you don't have to worry about the fact that we have actually codified this and we're reusing and accelerating you. What really matters is that we're helping you accelerate, the benefits of that, right? That actually, that messaging is actually very important in that process. And the third is, as a services company, I think, we all have to have the obligation to question ourselves. What is our mission again, fundamentally? Are we a services company? Are we a services plus solutions and product company? Right? All those things now drive, agendas for exactly where we're going to focus on versus not, right? So, and every company is different in that realm on choices they make. But to me, it's really important that we kind of question and go back to the mission and purpose of the services model and what that entails, right? So,
right, absolutely, and to be able to have the luxury of considering services versus service and solutions versus service solutions products is something that maybe larger firms that have the larger talent pools available to them can focus on. At ACEC we have a lot of small member firms. Some are only 1 or 2 employees. Do those firms need a digital strategy? Do they need to be worried about coming up with a product for their customers, or do you have different advice to them really just navigating business and technology in 2024 so that they have to focus on their bottom line, which is delivering the projects they have? How should someone at one of these smaller firms, think about a technology strategy, given the constraints they're operating under?
Oh, that's such a, yeah, very interesting. So I think, again, I mean, now let me use an example to talk about how this might materialize, right? So if it's me that is starting up a one-person consultancy, so to speak, the real question is, what am I offering to my clients and my market? Am I offering me and my expertise, right? Or am I actually the lens through which capabilities that they can actually envision come to life, right? Because if I go back to the gig economy, model and why that flourished, you could actually sit in a home office and actually run a business and actually appear to be a business at scale because technology was infusing a lot of the capabilities that was not necessarily available to you 10 years ago, right? So it democratized so much of what is available to us in being able to appear as a scale operation and really achieve, drive more value to our clients. And I think that's kind of where the fundamental question comes into play. It's not necessarily about should you or shouldn't you. It really goes down to, if you do want to, appear as more than one, beyond just your brains, I think you have the opportunity to leverage technology effectively and, harden the assets that the intellectual capital that you have, how do you harden that and make it available as a product, right? For example, how do you actually use an ecosystem of people and experts in a network ecosystem behind you to be able to, do that differently, etc., right? So there are a lot of avenues available to the 1Cs and 2Cs and 10Cs. We just got to, figure out, again, goes back to the vision and mission of what is that business really trying to do and who are they trying to be, right? So,
Yeah, no, great point. And so, thinking about what technologies exist today, maybe are on the horizon, are there any certain technologies you're bullish on, overly bullish on, and are there any that maybe you're kind of waiting to see before you jump fully in and start embracing them?
Yeah, no, I think I've been in technology now close to 40 years, right? In various inflection points of technology, all the way from, my goodness, when we were doing punch cards, and now to, consuming everything as a service from the cloud, right? And AI and everything. So clearly, I'm an optimist when it comes to technology, right? I think at the end of the day, a lot of the technologies, have come through and a lot of them actually live, right? And of course, many of them die, but a lot of them actually live. And technology's whole purpose is to change technology, right? In some way, right? We're still consuming music, but the way we consume music is very different than how we did it back in the 70s to the 80s to the 90s to now, right? So in that sense, technology actually was. So beyond the philosophical viewpoint, I'm going to say there are, I think we are in the, I'll use AI as an example. I think there's so much hype around the generative AI, dimension of AI that we have forgotten that there's actually immense value to, what I'll call classic AI, right? But underscoring that, the success of AI is really going to come down to data and how we harness the data, right? So, to the extent that AI is really, really successful in its adoption, it's going to come down to how well the organization is to be able to leverage the data that feeds the fabric of AI, right? So those are the 2 points about AI in general, about both on the fact that we shouldn't be just so focused on generative that forget that there's so much value to be realized in just the classic side of it. And regardless of which way you go, data and the operability about it, it becomes very, very essential.
Yeah.
There are always other, technologies, right? Whether it's around robotics, whether it's around the automation of it or reality capture. I mean, there are some different, technologies emerging that have very specialized, applicability, right, in certain areas, and they're always out there, right? Same thing in cybersecurity. I think we had to look at this as dimensions of technology of, whether it's cybersecurity, what is the change in the compute paradigm from classic to, again, quantum? What is the, paradigm shift between data and how it's actually consumed? There are multiple technologies driving these different aspects, but underscoring all of them, the reason why technology succeed or fail is not because of the technology itself. It really is the fact that did we ever connect it back to business strategy and outcome, right?
Yeah.
Because the only thing that has never changed in the 40 years that I've been doing this is there are always problems to solve and there are always tools available for us to use them, right? And the intellectual prowess comes into play of how we use these tools effectively to be able to solve those problems, right? But it's always about problem solving, right? That's what we got to remember, not just as about using technology, right?
Right. Yeah. No. And as you're talking about data, the importance of data, and thinking about a few points you made earlier in terms of upskilling or training or your staff knowing it's not just the new technologies, but how can these new technologies help us solve these business challenges, and then having skills to work with these kind of building blocks of new technologies like data. How does the CTO's office work with your HR or chief people officer or your talent develop group to basically make your workforce modern? How do you think about that in terms of, it's not just we're going to start using this cloud computing, but give your employees the training so that they can, when they're on site with a client or someone, connect those dots? How do you kind of work hand in hand with your talent development group to, achieve these goals?
Yeah. It's got to be pretty methodical, right? And again, it goes back to, I think to your original question about technology strategy. In a sense, technology strategy, it's all about connecting to how is technology enabling the business strategy that allows us to make the appropriate investments in technology, right? So that way you always know that this investment you're making is the right one because it is going to produce an outcome, right? That's the whole point behind it. But the investments we're talking about are not just in technology itself, but also in capability, right? So when we now talk about capability, we are now saying, well, to achieve that business outcome, we got to kind of create this capability to drive work in this way. And this is going to require certain types of roles, certain types of skills, certain types of knowledge and know-how to be able to get there. And now it goes through the current state, future state analysis to say, well, these 5 roles already exist in the company. Great. These new 4 other roles are not there. And by the way, there are some semblance of those roles in the company, but how do we now create a scale model? And now you work with HR to figure out defining those roles properly, defining a career framework, or aligning it to the career framework that's already existing in the company, creating new career paths and models for it, creating recognition paths for it, et cetera, et cetera. There's a whole model of how we need to go through, and you're spot on that this is an extraordinarily collaborative exercise that is done with HR and technology and digital and the business to get this stuff. Because ultimately, in the sphere, to my earlier point, it does take people to get through this mission. And for them to feel purposeful about it, they need the visibility that, what they're doing is not transactional. It's actually it's an investment that the organization is making in their career, and they actually have a very solid career path, to be able to grow in that whole model, right? So yeah, I mean, defining this is a very methodical exercise, and you're spot on that it requires a collaboration to do it. But that's exactly why we have to connect to the strategy. If it's just about, well, I need 2 guys who know cloud, that may be transactional, but it doesn't serve the purpose, right? So yeah.
Yeah. No, that is moving away from transactional thinking is definitely really important in that. So, thinking about embarking on a digital transformation journey, what do you think for a firm who is going to start doing one of these or might have just started with their journey, what is some of the biggest risks that they should keep in mind and look out for as they embark on digital transformation?
Yeah, so I think it is the fear of the unknown, right, is probably a lot of this, because I think in most cases people, I'll now give the engineer mentality to say, I think, engineers by nature, we need tangible things. We need proof points, right? We know how to solve them, but we also need proof points that we like to do things that someone has actually done, and we now try to improve upon them, et cetera, right? So we're innovators, but we're also very pragmatic, right? So it is essential that we understand that kind of a model, and then every organization we're going to find the bell curve about the 20% of the audience is just thriving and hunger for change, right? They'll be the change agents, and you got to go identify them. There's another 20-30% that are never going to absorb it, and that's okay, right? But the middle 60% are waiting. They're waiting to see how it's actually working. So when the risks that we usually take is we just assume, going back to change management, that the organization will just adopt it. So we got to be very methodical and purposeful about driving the change, but focusing on that initial 20% first, and using them to create that value so the other 60% can actually see it and start adopting it, right? So there is a mechanism behind how we actually have to go through with this. So the big bang approach I talked about earlier is a big risk, right? I mean, trying to do it all in one fell swoop, not being incremental, not thinking about change management the way we just talked about, not having the active C-level sponsorship. All these are fundamental, but eventually it comes down to we have to take a use case centered approach. Understand how the vertical slice actually breaks down into business and technology and infrastructure and so on and so forth. Understand the overall operating model for what it takes to accomplish it around roles and other things we just talked about, and being very purposeful about it, proving it, and then pivoting if that doesn't work, right? And being understanding. So it's all of those facets that really mitigate those risks. But to me, the risk really comes down to the fact that we kind of set a vision and saying this is what we want to do. We don't know the mechanics of what it takes to get there, and we just embark upon a journey without understanding what it takes to get on the journey, right? So
yeah, I like that. The use case approach is a good way to think about it. So as we wrap up our podcast, and I really appreciate you joining us, I want to kind of end on what you think the top opportunities, positive outcomes are for firms who are going to start their journey or thinking about undergoing digital transformation.
Yeah, well, it's actually endless. You can throw a dart anywhere in an enterprise and you're going to find an opportunity, right? But with that said, I'll break it down into maybe the three broad experiences we talked about, right? I mean, there are opportunities in customer experience, there are opportunities in employee experience, and opportunities in partner experience, right? Now, which of these we pick, in what order we pick, is all going to be driven by the prioritization and outcomes we really want to entail, right? I mean, are we really looking for internal efficiency as a big driver, in which case employee experience becomes a bit more paramount, right? Are we looking at changing because our customer feedback and NPS is really bad and we have to go work on that, right? That may impact the customer experience, right? So I think prioritization will be based on outcomes, but whether it is talent management, whether it's around, how do you actually, secure a project data and make it available to everybody in the enterprise that requires project data in a unified way. All these things are great opportunities for us to kind of work through things. But the opportunities are just endless in any of these three dimensions, Thomas. So.
All right, great. Well, Shankar, thank you so much for joining us today on the Engineering Influence podcast. Really informative discussion with you, and I hope you have a great long weekend.
Absolutely. Thank you, Thomas. Thanks for hosting, and you too. Take care.